Is Trump's guilty verdict really going to help him like he says it will? This is how he reacted outside the courtroom yesterday following the announcement.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
So many donations poured into former President Trump's campaign following the verdict that his campaign donation website on WinRed briefly crashed. Still, 17% of voters said a guilty Trump verdict would make them less likely to vote for him, according to a recent NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll. Trump is set to be sentenced July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Joining us now to discuss what this means for the Republican Party is GOP strategist Amy Tarkanian. Amy, thanks for being on with us. Who do you think is right here? Is Trump right that this is only going to help him come November, that people see that this is a sham show trial, or are the Democrats going to get that benefit of being able to say, hey, our opponent's a convicted felon?
Sure, and that sounds crazy, and I never thought I'd hear those words, but I think it's going to be a pro and con for both sides. Here in the state of Nevada, for example, you had President Trump who lost not once but twice. And I think the fact that we have an increased voter registration of nonpartisans and independents, second place Democrats, Republicans trailing in third, you're going to have to see these two gentlemen really hone in on their messaging and make sure that they are focused, laser focused on these third party voters. I believe that the majority of voters on either side were already heavily leaning towards their choice. But this verdict just further solidified the way that they are going to approach their ballot in November.
So yesterday's events triggered this conversation around felony disenfranchisement in the United States. In some states, only Maine and Vermont allow felons to vote, allow people in prison to vote. In many states, felons cannot vote. And in some states, felons can vote if they're released in prison. No one in prison can vote. But there's this question that should a convicted felon, if unable to vote in many states, be allowed to run for president? What's your take on this discourse?
That's a legitimate question. I've actually had a number of people reach out to me asking, is President Trump still allowed to move forward? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes. And I wouldn't just be saying that because it's President Trump. I would say that about anybody who was in this position. Here in the state of Nevada, once again, not too long ago, we actually now allow felons who have been released from prison to vote. However, I think that there's still a time period, a buffer, where one can actually put their name on a ballot if they choose to. So currently, we only have three requirements to be able to run for president, and that's to be 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and have lived in the U.S. for 14 years. And those three requirements President Trump does meet. So I think that we probably need to have a serious look and somehow figure out should felons in the future be allowed to participate at that level? And I think it's a legitimate question.
How do you think this is going to affect the convention in July? Obviously, the sentencing hearing is going to take place just 4 days before the convention in Milwaukee. Now, granted, the RNC has a team on the ground that's been there for over a year, that's been prepping, but you have to imagine that they're going to reference in some way or make some plans around the fact that their nominee is going to be in a courthouse a few days before and will potentially face prison time because of this conviction.
Well, I think that over the past 4 years, especially, Donald Trump has done an excellent job at removing people who are not 100% pro-Trump. And it has started at the party level. And I think that the state parties have disenfranchised voters by removing those who are not in lockstep 100%, who are not purists. But you're going to see these purists, they're going to be the ones who are attending this convention. These are going to be Trump's delegates who are willing to throw themselves on the railroad tracks for this man. And so I think that the convention is going to be quite electrifying for those who are going to dig their heels in even further for President Trump, even if he did end up behind bars, which I don't believe that's going to be the case. But you hear hear it over and over again that these people are willing to do whatever it takes because they do believe that he has not been served fair justice. They also have fed into the fact that this is martyrdom. He is a victim, and they too are victims. And that's something that President Trump has done an excellent job at riling up his troops.
Following the 2020 election and Trump's take that it was rigged, Trump's following a similar course of action, or rather a similar narrative, that the trial was completely unfair. Does the GOP have a response or a strategy for reining in that rhetoric or reaching out to the voters that really do believe this was not a fair trial?
Well, unfortunately, once again, you have those who are in leadership positions at state party levels, at county party levels, who fall in lockstep with whatever the president has to say. And the RNC, which is now, you have his daughter-in-law who spearheads. It's the perfect scenario. He's surrounded himself with yes people, and I don't think we're going to see that, not anytime soon. And I think it's unfortunate because you had 12 jurors. It wasn't Biden's administration. It wasn't George Soros. They weren't in that courtroom. You had 12 jurors who actually, I think, took the time to ask very thoughtful questions and have the judge regurgitate his orders not once but twice, so that way they made sure that they were making what they felt was the right decision. I think that this is unacceptable territory for our leaders to be questioning our justice system.
But do you think that the Republicans have a fair point, and Trump specifically, when they say Alvin Bragg ran on the idea of prosecuting Trump, as did Letitia James? This case, they were not allowed to bring in their federal election law expert to testify on the specifics of that law. And the prosecution was allowed the opportunity to go last in the closing arguments, which is the first time they really laid out their case for the underlying crime that Trump was accused of, which elevated this to the felony. That is to say, do they have some legitimate criticism that elements of this case were in fact unfair?
Yes to all of that. And I think this can be two things, and this is not what we're hearing from most people, is could it have been politicized? Absolutely. But can the same thing be true? It can be politicized and he was found guilty? Yes. And so I think that by DA Bragg campaigning from the get-go that he was out to get Trump was a huge mistake. And I think the fact that the judge also didn't recuse himself with his history, I think was a huge mistake. But here we are once again, and there was hard fact-based evidence in the bookkeeping, in the documentation, in the cooperation, and the jurors found him unanimously guilty. So I think we can have both things be correct.
So we're seeing that figure, about 17% of folks that would previously vote for Trump questioning their decision were he to be found guilty. Now that we're in that environment, do you see that number sticking? Do you see that 17% going to RFK Jr., Biden, or sitting this election out?
Yes, I do. It's a terrible situation to actually be in, and I'm one of those. My last straw was actually January 6th. There was a number of other issues leading up to it, but that was my last straw. And so I always said that if he were convicted, I am not going to consider him. However, I have a really tough time checking that box also for President Biden, who I think has been a terrible president and quite a disappointment. And I know a number of Democrats who feel the same way. So we're going to have to really sit down and outweigh, the good and the bad, and what are our options here? And maybe we're just going to have to hold our nose, and I might have to vote for, somebody who's not a Republican this go around, whether it be RFK or possibly President Biden, God forbid. But I cannot wholeheartedly vote for President Trump at this point. And I think there's going to be a number of us, and especially suburban women, and I am one of those.
We've seen a few different tones come out of various factions of the GOP in response to this. Larry Hogan, who's running for Senate in Maryland, former governor there, was pretty clear that he respects the decision of the jury. You have Mitch McConnell, who has never been a huge Trump fan, obviously, but worked with him on a number of issues while he was in office, including judicial appointments, saying that he thinks that this will be overturned on appeal, that he doesn't think the case should have been brought in the first place, but really stopped short of some of the more aggressive language that's been used by the Trump campaign, which is to say, this is a Stalinist show trial. This entire process was rigged. As a whole, where do you think the GOP is going to land in terms of this messaging war as they head into November? Are they going to take the more aggressive Trumpy approach, or are they going to be somewhere closer to between Larry Hogan and Mitch McConnell?
Well, I would like to think that there's going to be reasonable, rational Republicans who take this seriously. Unfortunately, once again, because the other choice is President Biden, at this point, President Trump, convicted or not convicted, he will definitely be able to beat President Biden, possibly, and that's a concern. You know, I think unfortunately, once again, we're going to have to just push through the next 4 years, and then whether if it's a good 4 years or a bad 4 years, and I'm kind of anticipating it's not going to be a great 4 years until we can get another set of options.
Thank you so much for joining us and breaking this down, Amy. We know you're busy, but we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.